I shouldn't be telling you this, but I can't keep it inside anymore. The truth about what happened backstage before Rihanna's Super Bowl ritual, it's something I wish I could forget. What I saw that night, it was too much, too terrifying. You see, I wasn't just a crew member. I was there, watching, when Rihanna stepped into a darkness I never knew existed. A darkness that wasn't just for the stage. What she did, it wasn't just a performance. It was a ritual. And I'm still haunted by what I witnessed. But now, it's time you knew what really happened. I've kept this quiet for too long. But now, I can't hold it in anymore. What I saw that night, before the Super Bowl, it's something I never should have seen. Something that's haunted me ever since. I need to tell someone, even if it costs me my sanity. The weight of it's been crushing me. And now, here I am, sharing the truth that no one else will believe. I was just part of the crew, working behind the scenes, making sure everything ran smoothly. We're the invisible ones, the ones who see everything that happens before the show starts. But that night, it was different. It wasn't just another Super Bowl. There was something in the air, something off. Rihanna wasn't acting like herself. As I've worked with celebrities before, I know the usual stress and pressure, but with her, she wasn't there. It was like she wasn't the same person. I can't explain it, but I felt it. The room felt colder, as though the temperature had dropped a few degrees. I tried to stay out of the way doing my job, but the whole atmosphere was wrong. The usual buzz of excitement was gone. The crew wasn't joking around. Everyone was tense, terrified even. But why? Rihanna walked into the backstage area and suddenly it all changed. No one dared to speak. No one moved. It was as if time itself had frozen. And as she passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something dark was happening. I wasn't supposed to be near her, but I couldn't help myself. I stayed in the background, watching as she walked by. There was something around her, something that made people avoid her. I couldn't explain it, but it was like she was more than just a singer. People were afraid, but no one would admit it. It was like she had an aura, a power. Then I saw something that I'll never forget. Outside her dressing room, candles were arranged in a perfect circle. Thick incense filled the air, making it hard to breathe. And the symbols on the floor, they weren't just drawn with chalk. They seemed alive, as if they were meant for something far beyond what I could understand. I stood frozen, unable to look away. Once she walked in, no one said a word. The crew stayed out of her way like they knew better than to disturb her. But I couldn't look away. I watched as she stepped into the circle, and the room seemed to stop. The air became heavier, time slowed, and I could feel it. Her power. It surrounded her. She closed her eyes and began tracing invisible patterns in the air. Her hands moved in a way that felt unnatural. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I was frozen, watching as she started to chant. It wasn't in English. The words were foreign, ancient almost. And as she spoke, the temperature dropped further. I could see my breath in the air. The walls pressed in around me, and every fiber of my being screamed to run. But I couldn't. I was stuck, paralyzed, forced to witness something I wasn't meant to see. How long I stood there, I don't know. Time seemed to stretch endlessly, but then, as quickly as it had started, she stopped. The room went quiet, empty. The tension that had been building just vanished. And I knew that whatever had been summoned, whatever had come into that room, it was real. When she left, the lights flickered, like the building itself had felt the shift. The show went on. The crew returned to their jobs as if nothing had happened. But I couldn't focus. I couldn't shake the feeling that what I had seen, what I had been forced to witness, was something far darker than any performance. And what Rihanna did that night, it wasn't a superstition. It wasn't some ritual before a performance. It was an act, one of power, one that summoned something or someone into this world. And I'm not sure what or who it was, but I know this. That night, something ancient and dangerous was awakened. And it's been following me ever since. And now, it's time to tell you the rest of the story. As I stepped into the room, I was immediately struck by how normal it seemed. No chaos, no rush of last-minute preparations. It was almost too still, as if the space was holding its breath, waiting for something. The walls were painted a soft, muted gray, nothing too bright, nothing too dark. The lighting was warm, gentle, as if someone had designed it specifically to make the space feel welcoming, comforting even. I noticed the faint smell of lavender in the air, like someone had tried to infuse the room with a sense of calm, though the smell didn't feel entirely natural. The candles, placed just out of sight on a polished table, burned with a quiet flicker, their warm light casting soft shadows along the walls. It should have been calming, and for a moment, it was. I could hear the distant hum of the sound system being tested in the next room, the faint chatter of crew members working behind the scenes. Everything was fine. Everything was exactly as I expected. I was supposed to stay out of the way. That's what I told myself as I stood there, taking in the scene before me. This was her space, Rihanna's. A sanctuary before the storm, a place to collect her thoughts before stepping out into the chaos of the Super Bowl stage. The room was tidy, arranged with a precision that didn't feel sterile but curated, like everything was placed just right for her. Her assistants, all meticulously organized, moved quickly but quietly, never speaking too loudly, as though every movement had its purpose. At first glance, it looked like nothing more than a celebrity's dressing room. Vanity mirrors with soft lighting, shelves stocked with cosmetics and perfume bottles, a lounge area with plush seating, and a large, intricate rug that covered most of the floor. It was like stepping into a world of luxury, of quiet privilege. Everything screamed familiar, comfortable. But beneath that glossy surface, there was something else. I felt it in the way the room seemed to close in around me, despite its open layout. The walls, though freshly painted, felt claustrophobic, like they were too close for comfort. There was an unnatural stillness in the air, almost like the space was too carefully arranged, too perfected. Even the air felt off. The lavender, the incense, it wasn't the kind of scent that filled the room naturally. It clung to the air like it was trying to mask something deeper, something hidden, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. A low hum came from the lights above, and I caught myself glancing up at them, wondering why that sound seemed a little too pronounced. The flickering of the candles, the soft buzz of the lights, the low murmur of voices. It was all so controlled. Nothing seemed out of place, and yet everything felt too perfect. The rug on the floor was arranged just so, The cushions were fluffed to an unnatural degree, and the mirrors, well, the mirrors seemed to shine too brightly, their surface untouched, smooth, and almost too clear. My movements felt slow, deliberate, as if I was aware of every single step I took. I didn't want to disturb anything, didn't want to break the calm, fragile atmosphere that filled the room. But there was this pull, this subtle pressure, drawing me further into the space, pulling me deeper into something I didn't understand. I felt like an intruder in a place that, by all appearances, shouldn't have felt this off. I turned, instinctively trying to orient myself when something caught my eye. A small, faint stain on the rug near the corner of the room. It was barely noticeable, the kind of thing you might miss if you weren't paying attention. But once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. I found myself staring at it for a moment, too long, trying to piece together what it was. It didn't look like a typical spill or stain. It looked deliberate. The more I looked, the more uneasy I felt. It was almost as if the stain had a certain weight to it, a heaviness that didn't belong. A stain in the center of this carefully constructed perfection. I stepped closer, my boots barely making a sound on the floor. The silence around me seemed to swell, expanding until it felt like the room itself was holding its breath. I reached down to touch the spot, but then, as my fingers hovered just above the stain, I froze. Something told me not to touch it. My gut twisted, and I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, louder than it should have been. I glanced around the room quickly, but no one was looking. The assistants were focused, their movements quick and purposeful, never acknowledging my presence. I should have left, but I didn't. My feet moved on their own, drawing me further into the room, closer to the stain, closer to whatever I was feeling but not quite understanding. It was as though the room itself was pulling me in, inviting me to linger, to stay longer. But there was something wrong. I felt it in the pit of my stomach, a subtle pressure that wasn't entirely physical. Something was off, and it wasn't just the stain. I was too aware of my own movements. Every shift, every breath seemed magnified, and the hum of the lights above me had become a constant, unyielding sound. It seemed to get louder, drawing me into its rhythm. But no matter how much I wanted to leave, my body refused. The room felt like it was changing with each step I took, the air thickening, the lavender scent now more intense than before. I heard someone speak from across the room. One of the assistants called Rihanna's name, a soft, hesitant whisper that seemed too loud in the stillness. I couldn't see her yet, but I could feel the shift. She was coming. The atmosphere in the room seemed to thicken with expectation. I should have left, but I didn't. My body stayed rooted in place. When the door creaked open, I didn't move, not at first. I felt her presence before I saw her. She walked in with such quiet grace, her silhouette framed in the doorway, almost too perfect against the light streaming from the hallway. I couldn't see her eyes, yet, but I could feel them. I could feel them on me. And as she entered the room, the air changed again. It wasn't dramatic, not in the way you'd expect, but something in my chest tightened. A shift I couldn't explain, and before I even knew what I was doing, I was watching her, unable to tear my eyes away. The space that had felt too quiet, too still, suddenly felt alive in a way I couldn't describe. There was something hidden in the air now, something lurking just beneath the surface. I could feel it, and I knew that what had just begun was only the start of something much worse. And that feeling, that discomfort, it never left me. Not as long as I stayed in that room. I don't know what I was expecting, but it certainly wasn't what came next. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It wasn't obvious, not at first. It wasn't like a sudden crash or a loud noise that made me jump. It was subtler than that. It crept up slowly, weaving its way into my thoughts, clinging to the edges of my awareness, like a whisper in a crowded room. But I couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was. It was just off. The room had started to feel smaller, despite the open space. The perfect order of everything around me, the gleaming surfaces and precisely arranged objects, began to feel suffocating. I wanted to take a breath, but it was like the air had thickened, holding something back. Even the sounds around me, the quiet chatter of the staff, the faint hum of the lights, felt wrong. They were too sharp, too clear. Like the world outside the room had grown quieter and distant. I was standing by the window now, looking out at the vast expanse of the stadium grounds, trying to shake off the odd weight pressing down on me. I thought about leaving, about stepping out, but my feet wouldn't move. It was like something had rooted me to the spot, something in the air, something unseen, but undeniable. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught sight of her, one of the guests. She wasn't anyone important, at least not in the sense that I recognized her. She wasn't a celebrity. I wasn't even sure who she was, but she was standing just across the room, her eyes fixed on me. There was nothing overtly strange about her appearance. She looked perfectly normal, dressed for the occasion, with an air of elegance that seemed to blend in with the rest of the room. But her gaze, it was too intense, too knowing. It wasn't just a glance. It was like she was measuring me, like she was reading something in me that I didn't understand. The moment our eyes locked, she didn't look away. There was no smile, no acknowledgement, just that piercing stare, like she was trying to say something without moving her lips. Something dark, something unspoken. I should have looked away, I know, but I couldn't. For a second, it felt like time slowed. And then, just as quickly as it had started, she shifted, turning her head as though nothing had happened, her expression now blank, unreadable. It was as if the whole thing had never occurred, but it had. I could feel it. Something about that look, the way she held my gaze for just a little too long, it unsettled me, planted a seed of doubt in my mind. I tried to shake it off, to focus on the room, on my surroundings. But there was more. There was always more. I noticed the locked door at the end of the hallway. I hadn't paid much attention to it before, but now, as I turned away from the guest, I found myself staring at it. The door was at the far end, tucked behind a heavy curtain, out of the way. No one seemed to pay it any attention, as though it wasn't there. The door itself was nothing special. It wasn't old or weathered. It wasn't marked with any strange symbols or unusual hardware. But there was something about it that felt wrong. The metal handle glinted under the soft light, untouched, but somehow uninviting. I couldn't figure out why it stood out to me, why my mind kept circling back to it, but it did. I looked around the room, trying to dismiss the nagging feeling that was growing in the pit of my stomach. The staff were still moving quietly, almost robotic in their actions. They didn't seem out of place, but there was something in the way they moved, the way their eyes never quite met mine. They were polite, almost too polite, in that rehearsed kind of way, as if everything they said, every movement they made, had been practiced 1,000 times before. But there was one of them, one staff member, who caught my attention. She wasn't involved in any of the usual duties. She stood by the door, her arms crossed, her gaze fixed on something I couldn't see. Her face was expressionless, blank, but something about her posture made it clear she was waiting for something. It wasn't her presence that unsettled me. It was the stillness. It was as if she had been frozen in time, caught in a moment before everything changed. Her eyes didn't shift, didn't blink. She was staring at something. No, not something. She was staring through something, her focus locked on nothing and everything all at once. I tried to catch her eye, to see if she would acknowledge me, but she didn't. She couldn't. It was as if she wasn't even aware I was there. I tried to shrug it off, but the room was growing smaller again, the air heavier. There was a sense of dread creeping in around the edges of my thoughts, a sense that I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and I had no way of getting out of it. I glanced back at the door again, the locked door, this time a little closer. I stepped toward it, my heart beginning to race in my chest. I couldn't explain why, but something about it was drawing me in. I placed my hand on the door handle, but as soon as my fingers brushed against it, I felt that pull in my gut again. The room, the entire space, seemed to close in on me. The low hum of the lights, the soft shuffle of feet in the distance, it all faded for a moment. I was completely aware of the door, of its cold metal surface beneath my fingertips. I could feel the vibrations of it, like it was alive, like it had its own pulse, its own rhythm. Before I could turn the handle, I heard a voice, soft, distant, but somehow very close. "She's not ready yet." I turned quickly, but no one spoke. The staff member who had been standing by the door earlier was gone, and the room was quieter now. Too quiet. My breath hitched. What had I heard? The door seemed to loom in front of me now, impossibly still, its presence more pronounced than before. The air felt dense with something I couldn't describe, like a shadow was slowly taking shape around me. The silence stretched on. I couldn't stay here much longer. Something was wrong. I could feel it. But before I could react, the door at the far end of the room creaked open. And just like that, the room shifted again. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but there was something about it that made my heart skip a beat. The quiet had returned. It wasn't the usual calm before the storm. It felt like something was lurking just behind the scenes, waiting for the right moment to strike. I couldn't see what was inside the room. I didn't want to, but I knew something was there. Something waiting. And then, out of nowhere, the staff member appeared again, slipping back into the room with her eyes still distant, as though she had never left. Her gaze flicked to the door, then back to the empty room, and for just a fraction of a second, I thought I saw something in her eyes. Something cold. Something dark. I didn't know what was coming next, but I knew I couldn't stop it. I had tried to convince myself that I was overreacting. Maybe I was just too on edge, too caught up in the excitement of everything. I told myself it was just the nerves of being backstage at such a huge event. The tension in the air that made everything feel off kilter. But deep down, I knew better now. I could feel it, pressing on me from all sides, the undeniable, growing sense that something wasn't right. Something was terribly, horribly wrong. I watched the door again, the locked one. It kept drawing me in, like a magnet pulling at my chest. I'd never been so obsessed with something so mundane, but there it was, its cold handle gleaming under the overhead lights. Every time my gaze shifted away, my mind would wander back to it. The space around it felt thick with some invisible force, and I couldn't shake the sensation that it was waiting for me. The crew members still moved around me, their steps precise and practiced, their eyes glazed, as if they weren't really present. It was like I wasn't even in the same room as them. I wasn't really here, not anymore. And then I saw it. It was small, imperceptible, almost, but it was enough to make my heart lurch. A slight movement, just a flicker at the edge of my vision, as if the locked door had shifted. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, the strange weight of the room messing with my senses. But then, there it was again. The door. It had moved. I wasn't sure how to explain it, but the frame seemed to tilt just slightly, enough for me to notice. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. My instincts screamed at me to walk away, to leave this place, to forget what I'd seen, but my feet wouldn't obey. I stayed rooted to the spot, eyes locked on the door. The air in the room seemed to compress, thickening around me, and everything felt muted, as if I was trapped in a moment of time that wasn't mine to control. That's when the lights flickered, soft at first, just a small blink, like a stutter in the electric hum of the room. I could hear the faint buzz from the bulbs above me, a slight crackle that cut through the silence. The moment the lights dimmed, I felt it. The change. The sudden drop in temperature. It wasn't a sharp, icy cold that makes you shiver. It was slower, like the warmth had been drained from the air in the space of a single heartbeat. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck prickle, and my breath quickened. The lavender scent that had once been soothing now felt cloying, suffocating, as though it had shifted from a calm, inviting fragrance into something toxic. The room seemed to close in on me, and my chest tightened. I couldn't breathe properly. I glanced around, hoping, praying that I wasn't the only one feeling this. The staff moved around the room as if nothing had changed, but they weren't right. Their movements were too fluid, too rehearsed. It was as if they were following some kind of script they couldn't break, as if they were going through the motions of normalcy while the world around them twisted into something else. I saw Rihanna for the first time in what felt like forever. She was sitting in front of the mirror, her back to the room. I didn't know why, but the way she sat there felt wrong. Her shoulders were tense, her body unnaturally still. She wasn't moving. She wasn't even breathing. It was like she was waiting for something. A cold lump of dread formed in my stomach, and my eyes went to the door again. The one that had moved. The locked door. And it wasn't just the door now. It felt like the entire room had shifted, like it was bending in on itself. A pulse, a heavy thrum in the air, like the sound of something distant, growing closer. And then it happened. The door opened. Just slightly at first, just enough for the faintest draft to escape. I heard it. A soft, almost imperceptible creak, followed by a hush that swept through the room, taking everything with it. I don't know what compelled me to take a step toward it. I didn't want to, but I did. It was like a force was guiding me forward, pushing me closer to it. My feet moved on their own, my body reacting without thinking. My hand reached out, my fingers brushing against the door frame before I could even think to stop. The coldness of it sank into my skin, seeping into my bones like the chill of a forgotten grave. The room felt alive, pulsing with an energy I couldn't understand, and I felt something shift beneath my skin. It was like the walls were closing in, pressing against me from all sides. My heart thudded in my chest, erratic, out of control. And then, nothing. Everything went quiet. I blinked. I was standing in front of the door, my hand still pressed against the frame. I hadn't heard it open, hadn't seen anyone come through. The room was dead silent, the crew members frozen in their places, unmoving, as if someone had pressed pause on reality. I turned, looking back at the others. They didn't move. They didn't even seem to notice, but something was wrong with the way they stood, too rigid, too silent. Something felt off. There was no chatter, no frantic preparation. The clock on the wall didn't tick. The air didn't stir. It was as if time had stopped. I was still standing there, my hand on the door, when I noticed something else, a shadow. It wasn't a real shadow. It was too thin, too unnatural, stretching across the floor in a way that didn't make sense. I watched it crawl along the floorboards, reaching out like fingers, twisting and turning as if searching for something or someone. I backed away, but the shadow followed. It stretched in front of me, blocking my path, moving faster than I could. I gasped, but no sound escaped. The pressure around me grew unbearable, the air thick with the sensation that something was about to break, something I couldn't see but could feel in every fiber of my being. And then, the door slammed shut. I spun around, heart racing, my mind screaming that I had to get out, that this wasn't right. But when I looked at the door again, when I looked at the space where it had been slightly ajar, everything was as it should have been. Closed, perfectly still. Nothing had changed. I didn't know how much longer I could stay here. The room had shifted again. Something had changed, and I couldn't explain what was happening. What was waiting for me? I stumbled back, a hand pressing against the wall, trying to steady myself. The weight of it all was too much. It wasn't just paranoia. I was sure of it now. Something was wrong here. Something was pulling me in, and I couldn't see how to escape. I had to know what was in that room. But as I turned to face it again, something else happened. A voice, low and calm, like it was meant for me alone. It's too late for you to leave now. I turned, but no one was there. I didn't know what came next, but I knew that I couldn't turn back. And I was about to find out why. I thought I was ready for whatever this place had in store. I thought I had enough control to face whatever darkness lurked behind the polished walls and perfect performances. But the closer I got to the truth, the more I realized how wrong I was. It wasn't just the shadows in the room or the locked door that made me feel like I was losing my grip on reality. It was what happened next, what I heard, what I saw. It started slowly, barely noticeable at first, like a whisper from the corner of my mind. The feeling of being watched, the crawling sensation on the back of my neck, those were things I could handle. But then, The whisper became a voice. I didn't understand it at first. It wasn't language. Not really. It was just noise, distant, crackling like static on a broken radio. But somehow, it felt like it was coming from inside my head. It was as if someone was speaking to me. Not with words, but with meaning. Something twisted. Something ancient. I turned, trying to make sense of what was happening. The room had grown darker, despite the overhead lights still glowing. The walls were closing in, my vision narrowing. My heart was hammering so loudly I could hardly think. That's when I saw it. Rihanna. She wasn't sitting in front of the mirror anymore. She was standing in the middle of the room, her back to me, motionless. But this time, it wasn't her posture that made my blood run cold. It was her reflection. Her face wasn't hers. I don't know how to explain it. It was her, but it wasn't. Her eyes were hollow, dark pits that seemed to stretch back into something endless. The skin around her mouth, the lines on her face, they didn't look right. Her reflection smiled at me, not with any joy or kindness, but with an unsettling, empty grin, like someone pretending to be her, mocking her in the glass. I blinked, and the smile was gone. In its place was nothing, just blankness, a void where her face should have been. I recoiled, my hand instinctively reaching for the door, wanting to leave, to get out, but my feet wouldn't move. I was stuck, staring at her. The voice, that voice again twisting in my mind. It was clearer now, like it was pressing in on me from every direction. It was familiar. It was a voice I'd heard countless times before, but it didn't come from Rihanna's lips. It came from somewhere deeper, something ancient. It whispered the same thing over and over. You're too late. I shook my head, trying to force myself to focus, to push the words out of my mind, but it wasn't working. The more I tried to push it away, the louder it grew. Too late, too late, too late. I could feel the weight of it pressing on me, crushing me from all sides. It was like the room itself was alive, suffocating me, pulling at my consciousness. I could hear the murmurs from the crew outside the room, but they sounded far away, distorted like I was underwater. The reflection in the mirror shifted again. This time, it wasn't Rihanna's face at all. No, it couldn't be, but it was me, my own face, twisted into that same hollow smile. My eyes were just as empty as hers, black and lifeless. I stared at it, trying to deny it, but it was there, staring back at me with a knowing grin. My breath caught in my throat. I felt like I was drowning, like the room was spinning and I couldn't catch my breath. I wanted to scream, but my voice wouldn't come. My body was frozen, caught in a place between fear and disbelief. And then the whispers came, no longer in my mind, but real, loud, surrounding me, pressing in from every corner. It's too late. You've seen too much. You can't leave. You'll never leave. I could feel it. The weight of the words, like they were wrapping themselves around me, tightening their grip. The walls were closing in again, the air thickening, suffocating. I couldn't escape. I couldn't move. I could barely breathe. The floor beneath me seemed to tilt, like the whole room was tilting, throwing me off balance, and that's when the lights went out. I heard the click before the darkness fully took over. The room was plunged into blackness, a pitch so complete that it was like being buried alive. I could still hear the voice, the whispers growing louder, more insistent. My pulse was racing, my body trembling, but I couldn't escape it. I couldn't get out. The darkness pressed in on me from all sides, choking me. I stumbled, trying to find something, anything to steady myself. My hands scraped along the wall, searching for a door, for something to break the suffocating blackness. I could hear my own breathing now, ragged, panicked, like I was running out of time. And then, just as suddenly as it had gone dark, the light flickered back on. But everything had changed. Rihanna was standing in front of me now. Too close, too close. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, locked on me with an intensity that made my blood run cold. Her lips parted, but she didn't speak. There was no sound, just the movement of her mouth. And I knew that what I was hearing was not words. It was a thought. My thoughts. She was in my head, pulling them out, twisting them, making them her own. You're too late. You've already seen too much. You can never leave. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but I couldn't. My body wouldn't move. I was paralyzed, caught in a moment where time itself seemed to stop. And then something worse happened. The reflection in the mirror started to move on its own. Not like a normal reflection, number. It moved differently. It smiled at me, that same hollow grin. But it wasn't my face. It wasn't Rihanna's face either. It was something else. Something is wrong. You'll never escape, the voice whispered again, louder this time, shaking the very walls around me. The room began to distort, the edges of the walls warping like something from a nightmare. The light flickered and buzzed, casting sharp shadows that seemed to stretch across the room like fingers reaching out to pull me in. I tried to close my eyes to shut it all out, but the images burned themselves into my mind, refusing to let me forget. It wasn't just the room. It wasn't just Rihanna. It was everything. The darkness, the whispers, the faces. I was trapped. And I didn't know how much longer I could hold on. You've already seen too much. There's no way out. And that's when I understood. It was too late. I don't know how long I stood there. It felt like hours, but it couldn't have been more than a few seconds. My heart was pounding, my breath shallow and ragged. I could still hear that voice in my head echoing. You're too late. You've already seen too much. It felt like it was inside me, burrowing into my brain, twisting everything I thought I knew. My chest tightened, my limbs shaking uncontrollably, and I felt trapped. The first thing I did was nothing. I didn't run. I didn't scream. I froze, completely paralyzed. My body refused to obey me, as though it knew I wasn't capable of anything but standing there, rooted to the spot, trying to process what had just happened. The room around me felt like it was shrinking, closing in, until I couldn't breathe. The walls felt like they were pressing against me, pushing me toward the door I'd tried to avoid. I wanted to leave. I should have run the moment I felt something was wrong, but I didn't. My feet felt like lead, and I couldn't bring myself to move. Every part of me screamed to get out, to break free from the suffocating pressure, to escape the unrelenting tension. But my body betrayed me. It kept me there, frozen in place, my mind racing, but my body incapable of action. I could feel the sweat pooling at the back of my neck, a chill running down my spine. The room was heavy with something I couldn't name. Something wrong. And it wasn't just the things I'd seen or heard. No. It was the way the world around me felt like it had tilted just enough to make me feel unreal. Like I wasn't supposed to be in that room. Like I wasn't supposed to see what I had seen. Too late. The words kept repeating over and over in the back of my mind. I couldn't escape them. Couldn't escape the feeling that they weren't just words, that they were a truth, one I couldn't ignore. I wanted to shout. I wanted to demand answers, but nothing came out of my mouth. It was like I couldn't form words anymore. I could only stand there, trembling, and wonder how I got myself into this mess. Then, without warning, my body finally moved. I don't know if it was instinct or sheer panic, but I spun on my heel and bolted toward the door. I didn't think so. Didn't hesitate. I just ran. But when I reached the door, it wouldn't open. I yanked at the handle, desperate, but it was locked. Locked. I could feel the metal under my hand, cold and unforgiving, mocking me. I shoved my shoulder into it, my breath quickening, panic rising, but nothing. It wouldn't budge. I turned, frantically searching for another way out, but there was nothing. No window to climb through, no escape. The only way out was the door, and it was locked. Trapped. My pulse thundered in my ears. My head felt light. This wasn't happening. This wasn't real. I wanted to scream, to shout for help, to do something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. It was like the air had been sucked out of the room, like the whole world had gone quiet, except for the sound of my own heartbeat, thumping painfully in my chest. The whispers came again, but this time, they weren't in my head. They were in the room with me, surrounding me, filling the air. You've seen too much. The voice was deep, distorted, but it carried that same unnerving sense of inevitability. You can't leave. You can't escape. I backed away from the door, my legs unsteady, my mind racing. I was losing control. I could feel it slipping through my fingers like water. I thought I could handle it. I thought I was prepared for whatever twisted thing I'd stumbled into, but I was wrong. So wrong. I backed into something, a chair, or maybe it was a table, and knocked it over, the sound of it crashing to the floor barely registering in my fogged mind. It was too much. The air was thick, suffocating. The walls felt like they were pressing closer, the space growing smaller and smaller until I couldn't breathe. The darkness was creeping in at the edges of my vision, swirling around me like it was alive, like it wanted me. I closed my eyes. For a moment, I tried to convince myself it was just a nightmare, that I was imagining everything. But when I opened them again, the room hadn't changed. The door was still locked. The voices were still there, whispering, repeating, clawing at my sanity. I felt a wave of nausea hit me. I couldn't breathe. I felt like I was suffocating, like the world was closing in on me and there was no way out. I had to get out. I had to ... I spun around, desperate for any escape, and that's when I saw it. Rihanna. She was standing in the doorway now, but it wasn't her. Not really. She looked wrong. Her eyes were wide open, unblinking, and fixed on me with that same unnatural, hollow stare I'd seen before. She wasn't smiling this time. There was no joy in her face, no emotion. She was just standing there, her presence filling the doorway like a shadow. And then, slowly, She began to walk toward me. Each step was measured, deliberate. Her movements were unnervingly calm, like she wasn't even human anymore. The closer she got, the harder it became to breathe. The air thickened, pressing in on me, wrapping around my chest like hands, squeezing tighter and tighter. "It's too late for you," she said, her voice low and flat. But it wasn't her voice. It was something else. Something darker. The room felt like it was tilting. I couldn't keep my balance. My legs were shaking beneath me. My body was betraying me. I wanted to run, but my feet wouldn't move. I couldn't move. I was trapped, surrounded by something I couldn't see but could feel. Something that was alive and waiting. Her presence grew stronger, filling the room, suffocating me. And then she spoke again. "You've already seen too much." I could feel my mind cracking, splintering under the weight of it. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I was slipping, falling, and I didn't know how to stop it. I had to get out. I had to escape. But I was too late. I could feel it now. The cold, creeping dread that had been following me from the moment I stepped into this place. The door was locked. The voices were closing in, and there was nowhere to run. And then everything went dark. I don't know what happened next. I don't know how much longer I was there. But I know one thing for sure. It wasn't over. I thought I could escape it. I thought that walking away would mean leaving everything behind, that if I just forgot, it would all go away. But I'm starting to realize that I'll never truly leave. Not after what I saw. Not after what I felt. It's still with me, lingering in the corners of my mind, lurking in the shadows of every room I walk into. I hear the whispers now, even when there's no one around. I can't shake the feeling that whatever happened there, whatever that thing was, it's still waiting for me, watching. And maybe, just maybe, it's already too late for me to escape.